Good morning, children. Welcome to our online session. So, first of all, I'd like to welcome you to class 7. So, you are a new students who have promoted to class this year. So, I am a new teacher taking computers. You must have done a lot in the computers in class 6. So, in this session, we will discuss about the different topic which are there. So the topic which we will be discussing today is chapter 1, the computer's hardware. So as you all know that computer hardware is the physical components of the computer. So when we just close our eyes and think about the computers, the CPU comes to our mind, the UPS, the monitor, the keyboard, the mouse. So these whatever we see is the hardware of the computer. So here today we will have an introduction on the computer hardware. So hardware, a computer system consists of hardware components and the software application program assembled together to perform the basics and complex functions like data processing and transmission, data storage and so on. Data processing, storage, transmission, data transmission, these are the function of the computer. So these functions are carried on by using the computer hardware components and the software components of the computer. The combination of hardware and the software makes a computer system. So computer hardware is very important for the computer. Computer hardware mainly refers to the physical system unit and the hardware devices which are attached externally to the computer. So when we talk about hardware, it is a physical system. It's a physical system units or the devices which are connected to the computers are called hardware. It is externally connected to the system. Any hardware devices which are connected externally to the computer system is refers to as a peripherals. So all the peripherals, the mouse, the keyboard, the plotter, the scanner, the printer, this one, webcam, everything, all these comes into the category of peripherals. So any hardware device which is connected externally to the computer systems are called computer peripherals. So it is possible to touch and see the computer hardware component. So combinations of computer hardware and the software makes the computer system. Computer system is used for the complex, perform the basics and complex functions for problem solving like data processing, data transmission, data storage and other functions. Now, today we will discuss about the internal hardware devices. So we all are aware with the external hardware devices. The different hardware devices which are there, which we see, which comes to our eye, is the external hardware devices. Now in this session we will just introduce the internal hardware devices. In a computer, the internal hardware devices are those hardware components which are assembled in a system CPU unit. So whatever is inside the CPU, that system unit, that big box, that whatever is there inside that, we will be discussing about it. It might not be visible externally unless you open the CPU box. So when you open the CPU box, you will see the internal hardware of the computers. Let us see some of the important internal hardware devices in the computer system. So motherboard. Motherboard is a main electrical circuit board in the computer. So when you open the central processing unit CPU, you will see the board out there. All the one circuit board is there. That is the motherboard. So it houses the memory slot. So memory slot is there, audio and audio visual card is there, network card is there, connectors for the hard disk. This data cable slots are there where you can insert the data cable, connectors to the various hardware devices which are the key hardware components involved in the computer processing system. So the devices, the hardware components, the hardware parts which are used for computer processing systems are shown inside the motherboard of the computer. So motherboard is the internal hardware of the computer which is there inside the CPU. In short, the motherboard contains everything that we call a computer. The microprocessor is there, SMPS is there, and many things are there. So many parts are there. It is the main part of the computers. The central processing unit. So another internal part is the CPU. So we call the big box as a CPU. Generally it is a cabinet which houses the motherboard. In the motherboard there is a CPU. The central processing units, or simply the processor, is a simple circuit chip which executes the command received as an input from the user. So whatever data is entered through the input devices is processed by the CPU, and the output is given to the output device. Its processing device, its execution takes place in the CPU. A CPU is responsible for processing the data, and it is important part of a computer. So central processing unit is important. It consists of three parts: control unit, arithmetic and logic unit, and memory unit. So CPU is divided into three, that is control unit, arithmetic and logic unit, and memory unit. Control units controls the flow of the data from the input devices within the processor. Flow of the input devices within the processor. Arithmetic and logic units does the complex arithmetics and logical calculations on data. So arithmetic and logical, which one is, who is taller, which one is greater? So that logic statement, that logical calculations and arithmetical calculation of the data is taken care of arithmetic and logic unit. Memory unit stores the instructions and data when entered. So data and instructions and data are stored in the memory unit when it is entered. So CPU is the computer. CPU is the main part of the computer. When we say computer, it means CPU. Without CPU, it's very difficult because everything is housed inside the CPU. The execution takes place with the help of the CPU, and it is divided into three parts, that is control unit, arithmetic unit, and memory unit. The another internal hardware of the computer which is there inside the motherboard is the RAM. RAM is the main memory of, or the random access memory. So it's a main memory. It is called, in full form is random access memory. The data which is being processed by the CPU will be stored temporarily on the RAM. The processed data, whatever we enter through the keyboard, is generally stored in the random access memory. Once the system power is off, the data of the RAM will get erased unless it is saved in the hard disk. So when we just, if we just off the computers, whatever we typed on that one, it will not be saved permanently. So it is a volatile memory. The speed and the performance of the computer is dependent on the RAM or the random access memory. So random access memory, random access speed of the computer, how fast is your computer, how fast your data is processed in the computer depends upon the how powerful RAM you have. The unit of measuring the RAM is in a megabytes or a gigabytes. The next component is the ROM. ROM stands for read-only memory. It gets activated when the system power is on and is the kind of primary memory. It consists of set of programmed instructions which are pre-embedded into the chip during the manufacturing process. The CPU uses the ROM to get frequently used command and instruction. So you might have noticed when we just on the power of the CPU, the machine starts on its own. Automatically it starts, and that time that starting takes place, and if there is any error in any of the peripheral devices or a software, it will flash on the screen. So automatic power on self test, when we just put on the thing, that comes automatically. That automation program is embedded in the ROM, random read-only memory. So during the manufacturing process, the automatic starting program is there in the read-only memory. So that makes your computer run automatically once you put on the power. Disk drive. Disk drive are the permanent storage device where all the data are saved. Disk drive, hard disk drive. Whenever you create a file on the computer, it is saved on the disk drive. So when we keep this file organizing for storage, if you have to keep the file for a longer period of time, we have to put in the disk drives. The disk drive is the collection of a thin circular disk called disk platters. Disk platters, collection of disk platters makes a disk drive. The disk platter is magnetic coated for data storage and retrieval. So disk drive, we can keep the data for a longer period of time in the disk drive. So random access memory is not permanent, ROM is non-volatile, and this one, so for permanently keeping the data permanently, we can store it in the disk drive. The next hardware component, internal hardware component, is the sound card. Sound cards or audio cards comes either as an internal fitted components to the motherboard, that is, it is inbuilt, or an additional expansion card to produce audio output. By default, computer do not have any audio output. By default, when we just buy the computer, if you do not have the sound card, the audio will not be there. The sound card processes the audio files and produces the audios as input. So sound card, the function of the sound card in the computer is it processes the audio files. You can connect your speakers or the headphone through the electric plug in the slot which connects to the sound card. The next card is the video card. Video card. The video cards or a computer graphics adapter. Computer graphic adapter is also said as computer graphic adapters, passes on the graphical data for the processors to any display device connected as the output unit in the computer. The video card can be of two types. Two types of video cards are there. One is dedicated video card, another is integrated video card. A dedicated video card has independent processors and video memory of its own for running the games with heavy graphics and animations. The computer needed a dedicated video graphics card which requires more processing power and speed to display the graphics. So dedicated means you can add it's independent of processor, it's an additional one for running the games and heavy graphics. The additional video card which we can add is called the dedicated video card. So if you have to make that processing graphical animations and all, you have to have a dedicated video card. Integrated video cards does not have the separate memory or processor but shares the main memory and processor for the video processing. So the processor of the computer, the microprocessor of the computer, which is when that processor is used by the video card, it is called the integrated. Dedicated means they had their own processing power, processors and memory to do the graphical processing. So this is the video card. SMPS, the main power supply, which is having an unregulated voltage fluctuations which adversely affects the working of the computer system when it is connected directly. Switch mode power supply or SMPS provides the power supplies to the personal computers in the controlled manner as required by the computer system. In case of the voltage fluctuation or a certain power failure, SMPS comes to the rescue by providing the power supply using the regulator. So switched mode power supplies, full form is switched mode power supplies, regulates the unregulated voltage fluctuation in the computers. Ports. Ports are the points for connecting the other computers or any external hardware devices to the personal computers. So the devices which are used for connecting the computers or any external devices to the hardware of the computer are the ports. It helps to communicate the data transfer between the connected devices. Ports are actually the opening of the external hardware devices to connect with the motherboard. So the device, the port, the hole in the CPU which help us to connect the peripheral devices like mouse, keyboard, internet, whatever, through the CPU, that is the port, the holes. So different ports are there which we will discuss in our next class. So this much for today. We will be continuing with the types of port, name of the ports and the types of ports used in the computer in our next class. Thank you.